Good morning. Today is Thursday, December 10th, 2020. We've all seen the yard signs, the bumper stickers, the magnets, the memes, etc. that say, "Keep Christ in Christmas," "Wise men still seek him," and "Jesus is the reason for the season." Some of which they even use the northern pagan Yule Tree and wreath, both of which represent our holy lands of the north, the Udales, Udalir. Here's the top view of Earth, showing the groves called Udalir, and how they form the wreath as well. Baba Yaga and the brushwood, Krishaki, should come to mind. However, is this mindset, which they prominently display and recite like a mantra, accurate, or is it merely more gaslighting on display? Let's get right into it and examine the details directly from their own writings, the Old and the New Testaments, as they are called. The so-called wise men, of which there are usually depicted to be three, probably because of the three gifts which they brought: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The gift of gold would be given to any royalty of that area for a gift, not just their birthday. And King Solomon should come to mind from their Old Testament. So there is nothing indicative about the gift of gold being specific to the character called Jesus and the birth. But they did insert into their writing that he was claiming to be King of the Jews. Now, frankincense is a perfume, and myrrh is a costly perfume and a bitter gum that was used for embalming. These last two gifts are associated with death, not birth, just as is seen in Matthew 26 of their New Testament, when a woman with an alabaster box containing expensive perfume poured it on the character called Jesus' head as he ate with his disciples. Notice what they have Jesus say in verse 12, quote, "She did it for my burial," end quote. Thus, the three gifts are not birth-related, and two of them are definitely death-related. Before moving on to the so-called magi, or wise men, it is important to note that the celebration of birthdays in itself is a pagan event. Birthdays are pagan. As a matter of fact, the reason that Job of the Old Testament had his family murdered by the God of the Bible is because it is commonly believed that they were engaging in the pagan celebration and revelry of a birthday. As well, Christmas, or Christmas as it's called, was not even celebrated until approximately 400 years after the character called Jesus died in their mythos. Now, let's look at these magi, or wise men, more closely. First, the mythos called the birth story of Jesus. Matthew 2, verses 1 through 4 states, quote, "Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and are come to worship him. When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born." End quote. Now we go to Matthew 2, verses 7 through 13. Quote, "Then Herod, when he had privily called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem, and said, Go and search diligently for the young child, and when ye have found him, bring me word again, that I may come and worship him also. When they had heard the king, they departed. And lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. And when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh." Remember, these gifts are burial gifts. And being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. And when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise and take the young child and his mother and flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. End quote. Now lastly, we'll go to Matthew 2, verse 16. Quote, Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, was exceeding wroth, and sent forth, and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem, and in all the coasts thereof, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. What we see in the Jesus birth mythos is a plot between the so-called wise men and Herod. Well, wouldn't it be better if the Bible writers had their God actually say in that Bible that magi or wise men were evil people? Well, they do. When the New Testament was written, it was written in Greek. And what we read in English is a translation from that Greek. Along with the words Greek, New Testament, Hebrew, Old Testament, there is a number assigned to each word, and that number is called the strong number. So, wise men in the birth story is the word magos, and it is assigned strong number 3097. In hermeneutics is a principle of biblical first mention, whereas when something is first mentioned in the Bible, it carries that same meaning every other time it is mentioned thereafter. When you use this principle of first mention, if you say that the magos, strong 3097, are good at Jesus' birth, which is their first mention, then you need to carry that meaning all the way through the New Testament for every other time they are mentioned. And it should match up that every other time they are mentioned, they are good. Well, let's see how the Bible describes what a magos is, seeing it is from that Bible that we are told these magos were at Jesus' birth. Strong 3097, magos, is only used on two other occasions in the New Testament, Acts 13:6 and Acts 13:8. Acts 13:6 states, And when they were gone through the Isle of Paphos, they found a certain sorcerer, a false prophet, a Jew whose name was Bar-Jesus. Sorcerer is strong 3097, magos, or wise men, in that verse. And a sorcerer is defined here as being equivalent to a false prophet. So let's look at Acts 13:8. It says, quote, But Elymas the sorcerer, for so is his name by interpretation, withstood them, seeking to turn away the deputy from the faith, end quote. Again, sorcerer is strong number 3097, magos, or wise men. And this time describes Elymas as trying to keep someone from the faith, their faith. So when you examine the two other times that magos is used, there is no doubt that it refers to someone who would be, by Christians, considered as evil. Also, if we look at Acts 13:10, we see how Paul addresses this magos, or wise men. Quote, And said, O full of all subtlety and all mischief, thou child of the devil, thou enemy of all righteousness, will thou not cease to pervert the right ways of the Lord? End quote. Bible writers have Paul call a magos a child of the devil who perverts the right ways of the Lord. Can you get any more direct than that from their writings? I don't think so. So why on earth would the New Testament use magos two times in Acts as describing a false prophet or a liar and someone who attempts to keep people from knowing their Jesus, full of subtlety and all mischief, a child of the devil, enemy of righteousness that perverts the right ways of the Lord? But in the book of Matthew, have a magos be people who are good in bringing gifts to Jesus' cradle? It doesn't. Like I said previously, these magos at the birth mythos of Jesus are evil. The interpretation of the mythological birth story was changed from what Bible writers first wrote, making the wise men, Magos 3097, into good people bringing birthday gifts, pagan birthday gifts. Hermeneutics and the principle of biblical first mention shows that these Magos 3097 were evil, and it remains consistent each time they are mentioned thereafter. Now, if you take it a step further and look up sorcery, because that is what a sorcerer uses, you have the word maguo, strong number 3096. It is only used once in the New Testament, and that is again in Acts chapter 8, verse 9. It's speaking about a man named Simon. Well, if you read about this Simon the sorcerer, you see that Acts 8:9 says, quote, "But there was a certain man called Simon, which before time in the same city used sorcery and bewitched the people of Samaria, giving out that himself was some great one," end quote. So, those two times that sorcerer appears in the New Testament are the only two times they appear in the Bible. But if you make it plural and look up the word sorcerers, it appears 6 times in the Bible, 4 times in the Old Testament and 2 times in the New Testament. First, I will give you just the other titles of the company that Bible writers put sorcerers in the Old Testament: wise men, magicians, false prophets, diviners, dreamers, enchanters, magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, which coincidentally is east of Jerusalem in Mesopotamia, adulterers, false swearers, oppressors, and people who lack fear of the Lord of hosts. The Old Testament sorcerers are people who practice witchcraft or use sorcery. Now I will give you the New Testament verses where sorcerers appear, both times in Revelation, with strong number 5332 and 5333, which is just a slight variation of the same word. In Revelation 21:8, sorcerers is one who prepares or uses magical remedies. The Greek word is pharmakous. Revelation 21:8, quote, "But the fearful and unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death," end quote. Now in Revelation 22:15, sorcerers means pertaining to magical arts. The Greek word is pharmakos, like pharmacy. That's where the word comes from. Revelation 22:15, quote, "For without are dogs and sorcerers and whoremongers and murderers and idolaters and whosoever loveth and maketh a lie," end quote. So every time the word sorcerer, Magos 3097, is used, or a variation of the word sorcerer, it is in an evil context by Bible writers. Even in the mythological birth story, the wise men, Magos 3097, were written to be evil. Sorceress appears 1 time in the entire Bible, in Isaiah 57:3 of the Old Testament. Quote, "But draw near hither, ye sons of the sorceress, the seed of the adulterer and the whore," end quote. Total, there are 15 variations of the word sorcerer in the entire Bible, and they are all evil. What is also very interesting is if you take false prophet and check out the strong number for that also, seeing that is used along with Magos to describe the person Bar Jesus or Elimas, you get strong number 5578, which is the Greek word pseudo-prophetess. This word is a compound Greek word, pseudo, meaning lying, deceitful, false, and the Greek word prophetess, meaning a prophet. Interestingly enough, strong 5578, pseudo-prophetess, false prophet, is used 11 times in the New Testament. Thus, the wise men still seek him yard sign, and other merchandise is established only with extreme gaslighting and indoctrination. Moving on to the creche, or the nativity scene. According to the Catholic Encyclopedia, the creche was invented by Roman Catholic Francis Assisi in the year 1223. I'm going to repeat that date. The nativity scene, or the creche, was not invented until 1223 of the Common Era. It is not in the Bible. Assisi loved the revelry of the holiday, the feasting, the drinking, and the merrymaking. He wanted to make a contribution of his own, so he invented the nativity scene. Luke 2:7 of the New Testament states, quote, "And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn." End quote. The Greek word for manger is what it says, a manger. So what is a manger? It is a feeding trough for animals. But the Greek word for inn is kataluma, and it means an eating room or a dining room, we'd call it. As all of the family members would be gathering for the census or the taxation that the Bible refers to that's going on at the time. So the animals were moved out of the lower section or the basement of the house, or were already gone with the shepherds in the field, and new hay was placed into the feeding trough or the manger for Jesus's crib. The word inn here does not mean a place of public lodging. It means the living area upstairs. The word inn is used elsewhere by Luke to mean a place of public lodging when the Bible writers have Jesus say that the Samaritan took the beaten man to the inn. That's in Luke 10:34 of the New Testament. In this verse, the word for inn is pandokion, and it means a public house for the reception of strangers. If we apply the principle of biblical first mention, we see that the word kataluma was first used in Mark 14:14 and was translated as the guest chamber, where Jesus was supposed to have eaten the Last Supper. We also see it translated to guest chamber in Luke 22 verse 11, which is the same Last Supper account as Mark 14:14. The Greek word kataluma is only used in these three verses and would be more properly translated in the mythos of Jesus' birth that there was no room at the guest chamber or eating room. It is in Luke that kataluma is used twice. Why would Luke, or Bible writers writing as Luke, use kataluma in that birth tale to mean inn, but then use kataluma for the Last Supper to mean guest chamber? They didn't. They both mean the same thing, guest chamber. And Luke does use a word, pandokion, to describe an inn. So all these words are used by Luke. That tells us that Luke knew what an inn was, a pandokion, and he knew what a guest chamber was, a kataluma. So why didn't he use the word pandokion when saying that there was no room at the inn in the birth mythos? Because that is not what he wanted to say. Luke was saying there was no room in the guest chamber of the house for a baby to be born during the taxation or census. One author, Luke, and he used all the words in question. Obviously, in the birth story, the English word inn is actually guest chamber, eating room of a house. In reality, where it is used, it is two separate words with two separate meanings when translated properly, kataluma and pandokion. So the manger scene, as we know it, is a lie invented by Francis Assisi and passed down through time and propagated by the church. Remember, the English version of the Bible didn't come until the 1500s, and then 1611 for the King James Version. So the addition that Francis Assisi made would have been well entrenched via indoctrination for about 300 years or more.
Claire Fawn, Assistant Dean for Academic Affairs at the University of the Holy Land, says Bethlehem, 2,000 years ago, was a town with Jewish roots, and Jesus was born into Jewish tradition.
Paul the Apostle, of course, is the first one who gives us this idea. In Galatians 4:4, he says, "When the time had fully come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman and born under the law." Jesus was born fully a human and fully within Judaism under the law.
In the Gospel of Luke, Joseph and Mary returned to the place where they had relatives. Family members had already arrived in Bethlehem just in time for the census. Unlike the traditional view where Joseph and Mary couldn't find a place to stay, in this case, they were welcomed by their Jewish family.
In Jewish society, you would go first and foremost to your family and ask for hospitality. Small Jewish villages didn't have hotels, and they didn't have motels, and they hardly had inns.
This is where patriarchal families lived. Sons, grandsons, cousins, and relatives. They would share a meal together, eventually filling up every room in the house. As the birth pangs began, Joseph and Mary looked around their family home for a place where Mary could give birth. Fawn says the key to understanding Luke's account of Christmas is his use of the Greek word for inn.
And in the text that we read in the book of Luke, when we translate the word inn, we're reading a Greek word, kataluma. And that word kataluma can mean a guest room or an upper room.
So what could they do in this circumstance to give Mary some privacy so that she could deliver her baby comfortably and securely?
Well, then we get our next clue from Luke's text. He says, "And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room in the kataluma, or guest room."
It doesn't make any sense that the birth mythos occurred in December, let alone the end of December on the 25th, if you think about it. Read Luke 2, 1 through 8. The reason Jesus was born in a trough was because there was no room in the living area of the house. It was full from other family members arriving due to the census or taxation that was going on, and not a place to give birth to a baby. To have all the people traveling in winter wouldn't have made any sense. It would have given an inaccurate census or taxation. Besides, according to their mythos, the shepherds were in the field keeping watch over their flocks by night. Verse 8, not in the winter. These, along with other evidence of John the Baptist being wild oats, which we address John the Baptist being wild oats in our book, Northern Paganism, Exposing Abraham. This wild oats, John the Baptist, was said to be born 6 months before Jesus. It clearly eliminates December and puts Jesus' birth, as per Bible writers, to be in September, during the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles. And wild oats, John the Baptist, born in spring, as wild oats should be. John chapter 1, verse 14 of the New Testament tells us, quote, "And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us," end quote. The Greek word for dwelt is skenao, which means to fix one's tabernacle, to have one's tabernacle, to abide or live in a tabernacle or tent.
But what about December 25th? Was that the actual day that Jesus was born? Or was December too cold for the shepherds to be out tending their flocks?
Many people have suggested that perhaps Jesus was born at the Feast of Sukkot, or Tabernacles, because we think about the prologue, John chapter 1, in which he said, "The Word became flesh and tabernacled," or dwelt among us. It would be a very appropriate time for the birth of Jesus.
Did you know this was in the Bible? Jeremiah 10, 2 through 5 of the Old Testament. Quote, "Thus saith the Lord, learn not the way of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven. For the heathen are dismayed at them. For the customs of the people are vain. For one cuts a tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen with an axe. They deck it with silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers, that it move not. They are upright as the palm tree, but speak not. They must needs be born, because they cannot go. Be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, neither also is it in them to do good," end quote. That would be a pagan Yule tree that the heathens were putting up and commanded by Bible writers to not do the same. Notice they also called those people heathen, who follow the stars or signs of heaven that was written into the Old Testament about 600 years before any Christ was added to a Christmas or Christmas. This was obviously a pagan practice that was taking place well before the birth of Jesus, where gods and goddesses were worshipped. Now, some Christian apologists will try to indoctrinate their laity by telling them that it's not speaking about a Christmas tree, but about idols. That is an extreme reach, because when speaking about idols, Bible writers come right out and say idols. But suddenly, when speaking about this decorated tree, they don't. Now let's go to the field with the shepherds. According to Bible writers, they were in the field watching their flocks by night. That's in Luke of the New Testament, chapter 2, verse 8. Shepherds were in the fields, not on winter nights. And an angel, not a star like the Magi, appeared to them and told them of the birth. Where? Verse 11 says, in the city of David. Then the shepherds left the field and went into Bethlehem, the city, and found Jesus in the manger in the lower room of the house, because there was no room in the eating room or kataluma. So, Bible writers say shepherds in the field. Tradition says the same, but has them freezing with their sheep at night in December. Bible writers say Jesus born in the city of David. No, tradition says Jesus born in a field. Bible writers say Jesus born in the manger because no room in the kataluma or eating room. No, tradition says Jesus born in a stable. If Christmas is actually from the Bible, shouldn't it match? Decades ago, I looked up Christmas in my Grolier Encyclopedia, and I found this. Quote, Christmas is the feast of the birth of Jesus Christ, celebrated on December 25. Despite the Christian birth stories, the church did not observe a festival for the celebration until the 4th century. The date was chosen to counter the pagan festivities connected with the winter solstice. Since 274, that's the year 274, under the Emperor Aurelian, Rome had celebrated the Feast of Invincible Sun on December 25th. In the Eastern Church, January 6th, a day also associated with winter solstice, was initially preferred. In course of time, however, the West added the Eastern date as the Feast of Epiphany, and the East added the Western date of Christmas. In medieval Europe, folk customs connected with the winter solstice were perpetuated together with the church celebration. The Puritans in England and New England tried to abolish Christmas because it was pagan. But that move was unpopular, and Christmas survived and has been developed commercially since the Industrial Revolution. This has had the effect of pushing back the Christmas festivities to the period before Christmas. In the traditional church calendar, the pre-Christmas season of Advent was one of quiet preparation, the festivities belonging to the 12 days, December 25th through January 6th, end quote. Even the dates used by the Grolier Encyclopedia I just quoted based their 12-day count upon the invented Abrahamic system and dates. I won't readdress the 12 days here. I've already addressed them in our video, Our Yule Tree. Someone may say, wait a minute, how come the church or how come my pastor doesn't know this and teach it? The answer is, they do know it. And if they don't, they should and shouldn't be teaching. The pastors that do know and teach it, teach their laity that while Christmas is pagan, it is okay to lie about it for their God's glory. Even though they are commanded not to lie and they have no direct biblical justification to do that. They lie. So yes, they actually say they celebrate a pagan Yule festival for their God's glory. Imagine that. They do this because there are 2 pagan days where they have an increase in attendance and an increase in donations from people, their laity. The first is the pagan celebration, which they now call Easter, which is the pagan Eoster, Ostara, Ostri. And the other is the pagan celebration of what they call Christmas, which is the pagan Yule. You can't keep Christ in Christmas if he was never the reason for the season to begin with. And that is where I will end this video. The event referred to as Christmas, is pagan. Christmas is pagan. Its elements are based upon northern paganism. The religious cults of Abraham have plagiarized and manipulated our ancient pagan customs, culture, beliefs, and practices. That mythological character people call Jesus or Christ or whatever other name they want to use, along with the wise men or the magi, good or evil, the shepherds, the nativity scene or the creche, the camels, and the manger, with an eternal virgin called Mary and her husband, etc., ad nauseum, need to stay out of our ancient northern pagan Yule celebrations. So, until next time, or tils nästa gång, good hälsa.
Mm-hmm.